I am starting out with a very light drawing. The drawing is very general. I don't want to paint over a lot of detail or have to cover up a lot of graphite. I keep it simple to indicate the placement of the portrait on the page and just enough of a description to give the proportions and placement of the features. I resist using an eraser so that the surface can be as clean as possible. The surface that I use to paint the gouache self-portrait is a Strathmore printmaking paper, 280 gm, approximately 100 pounds. The surface feels a lot like a hot pressed watercolor paper. I begin by building up washes of color, allowing for the paint to build up as I paint over areas that have dried. The paper buckles only slightly, so I make sure to tape the surface onto a stiff board. In my first pass, in my self-portrait in gouache, I established the big shapes quickly with washes of burnt umber. In the beginning, I work monochrome, more concerned about laying in the patterns of light and dark, and not being concerned about color. I can make the changes adding color and changing the color temperature as I develop the painting. My first two main concerns are the correct placement of the masses, the shape patterns of light and dark. I use one value for this. I'm just trying to place things and will come back in to add another value to further develop it after I am satisfied with the correct light and shadow patterns of the first wash. I add ultramarine blue and a little black to the burnt umber to add a darker value as I develop the features. I have to remember not to render, but to keep things as general as possible, which is the point of this exercise. I want to keep the detail to a minimum, just enough to tell the story. I want to describe this face in generalized shapes and not in details. At this point, I begin to add a color for the background. So I'm establishing the background. The background is important because it is part of the picture. The background adds air. It adds a sense of there's something going on behind the subject. In this case, going on behind the head. There's trying to get a feeling of air around the head. So the background helps establish that. Also, the background is very neutral, so it helps the head to pop out even more. So I'm establishing the background, and then I'm going to go over the whole thing right now, the head right now, and establish the middle value for the head. I'm also going to leave some areas of white because it's hard to get completely white once you start developing or once you start adding color to the paper. It's hard to get that white back. Not that I want it totally white, but in case I want a highlight in a certain area, like in this case the forehead and the nose, I want to be able to get that to as light as possible. And so because once actually with gouache, if I wanted to do that, instead of like I'm using a palette where I reactivate the colors, so what I could do is actually come back and add fresh paint to it, so that way that white I can put on thicker, not too thick, because if you place too thick paint, it's after all, it's not acrylic or it's not oils, it's gouache. So if the paint gets too thick, it will get brittle. So I don't want it to do that. I want it just to just to be able to cover what's underneath without being absorbed into the painting underneath. And the best way to do that is to leave leave the areas where you want lightest to be as white as possible, or with as little tint as possible, little paint build, or as tint, but rather not a lot of paint buildup. And so that way the new paint doesn't just get absorbed into the old paint. It can just sit on the surface better, and it can be noticed much better. After placing that middle value, you can see that it's easier to see this as a whole, whereas before I was just think of it in terms of the drawing, where I was looking only for the size and proportion of the thing, right? Over here now I have the size and the proportion of it, the values, and I'm starting to work into the color, so it's easier to see it as a whole. So I'm playing more with that, and then it's easier for me to come back into it and establish the darks and what's going to be dark and what's going to be light, and building up the shadows as well. At this point, I'm going to speed up this painting because there is a lot of painting to cover. Basically, this small gouache took me a little over 3 hours to paint. So I'm going to speed it up just for the sake of getting everything in there. Now, the brush strokes will be fast, but at least I won't be skipping over some of the things or some of the passages. You'd be able to see the painting in its entirety, how it was developed. As a student, when I was in a classroom setting where a model posed, and for the first time I was really learning how to paint from life, I did not do any underdrawing. We all learned how to paint in oils, starting with washes of burnt umber or sienna to indicate the placement of the subject onto a gessoed masonite board. At the time, what was taught was the idea of working from the general to the particular. Lay in the big masses, find the bigger shapes first, and then after establishing them, break it down to smaller and smaller shapes. At some point, you see how interesting those big shapes are, and see there is no need to develop the painting any further. That, or you get so carried away with rendering that you lose the beauty of those big shapes. Sometimes there is a going back and forth with rendering passages and then painting over them to get back to the simplicity of that general look. It's hard to settle on the middle ground between the overly rendered and the overall impact of rendering only enough. At what point do I put the brushes down and say that the painting is finished? I remember that as an example, our instructor would tell us to examine the work of the old masters, particularly Rembrandt or Velázquez. I lived in New York City, so it was very easy to go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art and look at either one of them. There's a Rembrandt self-portrait at the Metropolitan Museum. I remember visiting the museum a number of times and always stopping by to view the painting. It was amazing to see how complete the painting seemed, even though the artist was very selective with what he actually rendered. Also, there were degrees of rendering. Some things indicated only by a change in color temperature, others a little more involving, but the heaviest amount of rendering were saved for where he wanted you to pay the most attention. Other areas were rendered just enough for you to recognize what it is. Like the artist's hat. It was basically just a dark shape, enough for my eye to read that it is in fact a hat. Personally, I had a tendency to render everything. I had to put a lot of effort into being more selective in the detail I would put in. It is easier to do this when working from life versus working from a photo reference. When working from life, our eyes are focused on one area where we see a great deal of detail, and all things outside that are blurred or out of focus. That's just how we see. A photo does not discriminate, picking up details all over the image area. There's a great deal more of editing to do when working from a photograph. The first thing to do is to decide where you want the viewer to focus the most attention, and that is where the majority of your rendering will take place. For instance, in this portrait, I think it would be the eyes. That is where I want the majority of the rendering to take place. However, because I love to render, there was always this pull, especially with the beard. I mean, the beard is so, there's so much to it that I love to render. Like, I don't want to try and get every little hair, but I would try to get more of a reading of it with a little bit more details than maybe I would want. So I have to back off from that just a bit in order to not over render the image. So normally with a portrait, it's very easy because of course you want people to look at the face. However, when the face is this close up, you have a choice of where exactly in the face do you want this person to look. There's a number of choices. Like I said, my choice is the eyes. The challenge is to not render everything else to any great degree. However, there may be a specific area of the face you want people to focus on. Like if it's not the eyes, it could be the nose. I don't know. Whatever you find interesting. One of the things with Rembrandt, he would emphasize one eye. He would not emphasize both eyes. If you look at the portrait that's in the Metropolitan, he has a self-portrait in the Metropolitan Museum, which I talked about earlier. When I went to look at it, one of the things is that one of the eyes is in shadow, and he renders that just enough for you to see that that's an eye. But the other eye is rendered more fully. Now, it's not a lot of detail or anything like that, but it's just more established, more rendered than the other one. So, like, you can pick at the eyes, but you can pick just one eye. I think for me, because I'm looking straight forward, it's really, both the eyes are actually in shadow. So I want to try and render them as much as I can without overly rendering them, but in equal amounts. And in that way, you're looking at the eyes. In Rembrandt's portrait, it was more of a three-quarter view rather than just looking at you fully to the front. And the lighting was set differently, so it would give you more of one eye in shadow and the other eye not being in shadow, being revealed by the light. So that is how he did his portrait right there. As I develop the shapes in the patterns of light and shadow, I am refining those shapes, giving them just enough information to recognize the shapes of what it's supposed to represent, the eyes, the nose, etc. At the same time, I want to make sure that those shapes work together to form a whole, to form the head. At times, I add detail and take it away as I try to decide whether I am putting in too much or too little. The end result will hopefully be enough of a compromise between the general and the specific, enough so that the details would not be missed and the final image would be interesting with the information that is there, the information that I let stay in. As little detail as there was a lot of thinking and planning in the process that took a great deal of effort. For this 8x10 gouache, it took over 3 hours to finish. It's a simple little painting, but that simplicity took a lot of thinking and rethinking as I went along. Actually, I think taking more time with it, going even more slower, would have helped a bit more. But for the purposes of this painting, for this demonstration, it works. Now, I have a tendency to go fast, to try and finish things too quickly. So it benefits me to go slower and to make decisions slower, because there's something I might miss. Speed painting is not something that I have to do, especially when I'm doing something like this where I don't have to rush because the model is not going anywhere. So I have time to think these things through. So it would have been better for me to slow down. Now, do I like it? Do I like this painting? Maybe. I think that for me, this painting is a step in a direction that I want to go, that I want my painting to develop. It doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be a marker. It has to be a place where I can think about and develop further if I want to. Or I might change my mind and develop in a different direction. I don't know. But this is a starting place for me to consider. It's a starting point to the direction that I may want to go. And that it makes it interesting for me to further develop this painting or develop paintings like this in the same manner. My paintings will be a constant decision of making more or less in terms of details. You know, do I want to put in more detail? Do I want to put less in detail? What do I want to emphasize? What don't I want to emphasize? Those are always decisions in just about any painting, but it's important for me in terms of how I want to develop the way I paint. So because there's so many things that become unnecessary, and I have to just basically decide what my painting is going to be about. What do I want to say? It helps me to just abbreviate things, to get to the chase, so to speak, to just say what I want to say and then put my brushes down. So, as I said, I'm going to have to decide in the future how I'm going to add what I'm doing here in terms of limiting the amount of detail or amount of rendering that I do to a painting or what have you. But as far as this painting is concerned, I'm coming to the tail end of it, so I'm on the last few minutes of this painting, and so I'm going to do a little house cleaning in regards to my channel. First of all, if you made it this far, thank you for making it this far. I really appreciate the fact that people are watching, people leave comments, and I'd like to really get feedback. It helps me in understanding what you guys want and where I can grow this channel from here. Now, I had to take a few step backs recently because I was hospitalized. So I was hospitalized for just a couple of days, but that really took a little out of me and needed time to recover and so forth. So I'm still trying to continue on my commitment to posting these videos every Tuesday. And so far that's unbroken regardless of what has happened. But I do want to ask that any suggestions as far as videos. I had a great suggestion a little while ago, and I've got to put a video together for that. Someone had asked me in regards to the folds in the clothing and so forth. And so far I've been pretty much focused on the bust, the portraits, but I have done other things. And certainly I can get into doing folds in the clothes that we wear and so forth, and do a video on that. But primarily I do portraits, and that has been really just a joy for me to do, because for me there's so many different combinations of personalities and faces and so forth involved in making portraits that I really thoroughly enjoyed. So I'd rather really continue on doing that than anything else, although I've gone on and done a work outdoors and sketches outdoors and so forth, and that's always fun to do. But primarily what I enjoy doing is portraits, and that's what I'm really aiming to focus on in my videos. However, I am open to any suggestions as far as something that somebody out there wants to learn and add. So with regards to that, just send your suggestions, let me know, and I will definitely look into it. If it's something that is in accordance to what I want this channel to be and what I do, then I will certainly put it out there. So look for the one on the folds and clothing and so forth. That video will be coming soon. But other than that, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll be looking forward to the next time when I post another video and see how you guys enjoy that. So thank you very much for supporting my channel, and if you please hit either the like or subscribe, or actually if you haven't subscribed already, hit both. So I will see you next week or next Tuesday. Bye-bye.